Okay, good evening, everyone. And again, welcome to tonight's parent-wide session, CPIC session. I'm Janelle Thomas-Smith, Executive Director and founder of Halton Black Voices, and I am so pleased to see so many of you join us today. We had over 900 people sign up today for this very important session. Tonight's session is called Raising Critical Thinkers and Motivated Learners in the Age of AI. It is a timely and vital topic for all of us as we guide our children through education and prepare them for the future. We have the pleasure of welcoming our presenter, Jonathan Bloomfield, founder and CEO of Adentive, who specializes in teacher productivity and AI literacy. Jonathan will explore how students can effectively use powerful AI tools such as ChatGPT to generally support their learning, not just as a shortcut. And we will emphasize the continued importance of critical thinking, discernment, and emotional intelligence. Throughout the session, we will touch on 4 key areas: using AI as a learning partner, not a shortcut; supporting students with IEPs and closing learning gaps; and preparing youth for future-ready careers in digital literacy. Also, encouraging balance between technology and human skills. We will have a dedicated Q&A portion towards the end of our session, so please feel free to submit your questions using the chat or the Q&A function. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jonathan Bloomfield.
All right, thank you so much, Janelle, for the introduction and for bringing me in. Nikki, thank you for all of the back-end support that you poured into making this possible. And thank you to everyone who's joining. I know we had almost 950 people sign up, which means you are a part of the 150. Oh, I'm seeing people say no audio or increase the volume. So I would say as much as possible, depending on your device. My microphone is nearly maxed out, so it might be worth trying to turn up the voice, and I'll be sure to speak as closely into the microphone as I can without screaming. Okay, yes. And if you have any issues, feel free to just let me know in the chat and we can try and troubleshoot them. But as a little thank you for your patience, I'm going to start with a little story. And the last time I was working with the HCDSB would have been, I think, in May of this year, either April or May of this year. And in AI years, that feels like decades ago. And one of the interesting things that happened the week of the workshop I did with your staff was there was this new video generation model that Google came out with called Nano Banana or VO. Sorry, not Nano Banana, but VO 3. That was the first time people could prompt their way to audio and video synced together with just words and images. So, as a mini reward for your patience and kind of helping us navigate the little technical difficulties, we're going to start off with something that was not possible until the last time I was working with your board, and that's this idea of having an all-in-one production suite that you can work on just from text and images into coherent video. So everything you're about to see is AI generated, obviously by somebody who knew what they were doing. But this is, I think, the starting point for many of the things that we're going to talk about today.
A revolutionary athletic program is challenging everything we thought we knew about cats. Here's Brooke Landry.
You might think a synchronized swimming team for cats sounds insane, but a brave team of trainers is trying to prove the skeptics wrong. They coach the Seattle Meowrinas, and I recently sat down with them to understand why.
For me, it's all about the rush you get poolside watching these cats perform.
The training regimen is rigorous. 6 hours daily, no breaks, no excuses.
We mostly coach with laser pointers, sometimes yarn. A few are quite opinionated.
But that might not be the whole story. An anonymous whistleblower claims the team has resorted to performance-enhancing drugs, including catnip injections. Some rooms were off limits at the training compound. There are also questions about future funding. When we asked who was paying for all this, the team was hesitant to answer.
A tech company
pays for it, but after all the drownings, they won't let us use their name anymore.
So that was the first time I think that we could do this. And if you've seen some of the horrifying videos of people using AI to create videos of Will Smith eating spaghetti, things have gotten scarily realistic over the course of the past few years. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to spend maybe about, I'm going to try and limit myself to maybe 45 minutes to an hour of just walking you through some of the basics of where AI is at, how it applies to your students, and what this means in terms of their future career prospects or even some of ours. But before we start, I think me putting on my teacher hat, we have to go through the agenda. Now, when I say what AI can do today, I think this is so important because every few weeks there seems to be a step change in its capability or a step change in what we discover we can do with it. The second piece we're going to touch on is how AI can support students. And the third piece, and I should probably just get up a little bit, but the third piece is really about what it means for our work. And then, like Janelle mentioned, as Janelle mentioned, we're going to have some time for Q&A and follow-ups. In terms of housekeeping, I should note that after the session we have, I'm going to send out a quick form that you can use to drop in any questions we did not have the time to address. And what I like to do with sessions like these is send over a post-session resource pack with maybe some of the chats. We explore a few additional resources, videos, and articles that you can read to make sure the learning doesn't stop as soon as our time is up for today. So I'll have more information on that close to the end. But in the meanwhile, let's kind of get started. So the reason I'm here today, awesome. Yeah, thank you. So the reason I'm here today is because I've kind of stumbled into education and now into AI, and the intersection of those two things seems to be very important right now as we try and navigate what this means, especially as parents for your students. When I introduce myself most often these days, I kind of tell people that I wear 3 different hats. So the first is that I build productivity software for teachers, and I do workshops with students and professional development for teachers centered around entrepreneurship, coding, and more recently AI literacy through my edtech startup Adventive. AI literacy is very much a hot topic in business and not-for-profits as well. And so I also run an AI consultancy and upskilling business that I call Upscaled. And I'm an entrepreneur in residence with the Black Founders Network at the University of Toronto, where I'm supporting founders in scaling their tech operations. My background before teaching was chemistry, stumbled into education because of a high school teacher of mine, and I've spent the past almost 8 years of my life either teaching myself how to code, teaching others outside of the classroom, all the way from elementary school students to post-secondary and adult learners. And I've kind of gone from teaching math, science, computer science, and special education at the high school level to now teaching some of these more complex and emerging topics to learners of all age groups. A few highlights, because some of them are a little bit more recent, is one of the coolest things I've done, I think, as an entrepreneur was get to meet the former prime minister at a pitch competition I did a few years ago. And then the top is a program I've done with an entrepreneurship edtech program I've done with NBA champion Pascal Siakam, if you remember legendary 2019's Raptor run, as well as Google for Startups in the DMZ. And Pascal was in town about 2 days ago, so myself and the other program participants got to meet him, which was a pretty cool highlight from my year so far. So far in 2025, I've done over 25 workshops with students and staff, worked with over 15 school boards and not-for-profits, personally trained 650 teachers and over 450 students on foundational AI literacy concepts. So we're going to extend on that a little bit today. And the one through line I see with all of the work that I do is this idea that the amount of hype that we have for AI and the amount of fear mongering is really astronomical. What AI can do is maybe down here, and the ways that many people use it and understand it is down here. So a lot of my work this year has been kind of trying to bridge the gap between what's possible, how it can be used constructively and ethically, but also raising that awareness across sectors, because many people have heard about AI and know about AI, and in some cases can be a little bit misinformed because of the hype and the marketing and the fear mongering. And so we're going to work to kind of deepen that understanding over the course of the next hour or so. So first things first, and maybe we'll do this because everyone has access to the chat, we can just make it simple. But if you could do me the favor of typing in the name of the AI tool you've used the most frequently in the last 3 months, I'd find that really helpful. And just to start things off, I'm going to type in mine. Let's see. So I'm seeing Copilot, Gemini, ChatGPT, Copilot, a ton of ChatGPT and Geminis. Okay. Copilot and ChatGPT. Interesting. DeepSeek, one DeepSeek. Very, very interesting. They came out with a math model earlier today that's supposedly world-class at really complex math problems. And I'm just going to keep an eye on the chat for a little bit. VO3, Goblin Tools, Humanize AI. That's one I hope to never hear about again. Gemini and Perplexity, which is interesting. Unsubscribed from Perplexity because I found other providers a little bit more useful. For those who are using Perplexity, I'd encourage you to take a look at something called Kagi. Copilot, Claude, thank you for the Claudes. Grok was world-class for, about 18 hours last week until Google came out with their model. Ideogram's really cool for images. So I'll give it maybe 5 more seconds. Yeah, Fowl is pretty interesting. If that's a typo and was DALL-E, DALL-E used to be a really good image generator model that was replaced by GPT's image generator. Canva as well. Yep, we'll get back to that. And we'll say 3 more seconds. 3, 2, any last suggestions? Going once, going twice. Good. And so unfortunately, or why not humanize? Because I don't think I like the idea of people using AI to try and humanize AI generated text. And in many cases, instead of needing a separate platform to achieve that goal, people would be better served picking more powerful AI models, prompting it better, providing the model with better context, and then not accepting what comes out of it, but rather collaborating with the AI, giving it your draft, having it critique your draft, update your draft together, and then export it from the AI into your own notebook, and then put your own finishing human touches on it. And so many of the tools that are currently out there that are all around make our AI writing undetectable, I think just come down to the fact that we haven't internalized how to effectively collaborate with these tools yet, but I'm biased. And this is probably something we get back to a little bit later. So in terms of key considerations, what's interesting is that the patterns that you mapped out in the chat kind of mirror what we see in general, in that most people have kind of Kleenexed ChatGPT, in that when we think about generative AI, the word that comes up the most often is ChatGPT. And that's because it dominates the web traffic that goes to all of the AI tools. This was a screenshot of a report that came out about 2 weeks ago. This might have changed in the past 2 weeks because of announcements we'll talk about in a bit. But by and large, when people think of AI, they think of ChatGPT. Gemini is starting to become a little bit more popular, and everything else is really just a drop in the bucket of AI use, despite the fact that in enterprise, Claude is maybe about 40 to 50% of use, which is very, very different from what we use as consumers. The second and very strange piece that I never thought I would say this year is that, yes, I understand that models have different skill sets and quirks, but people run all sorts of tests and benchmarks to try and figure out which models are good at which tasks. And this was a benchmark called Vending Bench, where a research lab decided to see how well different large language models or different generative AI text generators could run a vending machine business. And what I highlighted in red is that in the study, when they took a look at the human performance, and that the majority of the best large language models in the world, the majority of these actually came out this year, far surpass the average human that they tested or that they measured in being able to run a successful vending machine business. And this has effects that I don't think we've internalized yet. And yes, you will get a recording and some notes and some additional resources sent over afterwards. And also for the people who couldn't attend, we'll make sure they have something useful as well. The third thing, and this is maybe where I should kind of talk about how I use AI myself, is that I wanted to briefly explain how large language models work. And because I knew this, but I didn't want to write this, I went through this two-step process of building this out for you. So as of last week, Google Gemini 3 Pro came out, and they also introduced a few additional features built into another Google product called Notebook LM that you can use, that we're going to talk about in the context of studying in a little bit. But just to show you some of the ways that I'm using AI to make this a little bit more practical, what I did was I used my AI search assistant called Kagi, and this is what I use instead of Perplexity. I just find it gives me better answers faster and it's more customizable. So what I did earlier today is I went to my AI search assistant and I said, explain like I'm 5, how are large language models developed? And so it was very, very quick. And just to show you how quick this process is, if I go like this and I paste in my query, I have a custom prompt that I set up. It's going to search the entire internet for me. And I'm going to type this in. And it's going to search this up for me and then use a large language model to synthesize a response. And we're seeing Google rolled something out like this recently. Perplexity has had this for a long time. And now more providers are trying to catch up to speed with this. And so within a few seconds, I had a question. I was curious. I wanted a simple answer. I searched and I got one. But I didn't want to put this in as just a slide. And so what I did in this case is that I told it to, second prompt, oops, and this was for the troubleshooting earlier. And so what I did with this is in the second part, I said, turn this into the content of a slide with 4 clearly labeled steps. And so now I got this. So I got step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And then I said, this isn't really good. Let me go into Notebook LM and let me try to make this a little bit more interesting. And so what I did is I went to Notebook LM, I uploaded my source that had all of this information. So I just copied it over, just like this. And then I clicked one button that said generate an infographic. And within about a minute or two, it had this infographic that really just made everything that I wanted to explain very visual. But if you're taking a look at this, you'll notice that for every step other than the first step, the title and the description are repeated. And I thought to myself, this is not what I want. So AI can be helpful, but you still need to have your judgment and your discernment to be able to modify and work with it, because it doesn't really know what we want, but it tries its best given the information it has. And so what I did as a follow-up is I created another infographic, but this time I used the custom prompt and I said, highlight each of the 4 steps without being redundant and without repeating their descriptions. And so in this case, it gave me something a little bit different, which is the content of our slide. And so when we think about how AI, in this case, large language models, the text-to-text models work, it's really this 4-step process that starts with this idea of collecting a massive amount of data. And so this could mean gathering data sets from online that are curated. That could mean just scraping the entire internet and compressing it into a data source that's readily available for the LLM. Some companies have purchased millions of books, scanned them page by page to then use them in the training data. Then the second piece is, and this is a gross oversimplification, but we'll just say that a lot of very high-level math happens behind the scenes to then try and model the way that words typically fit together in all of the texts that have been collected. And then you start training the model to say, okay, given all of the words that you've seen before, if I start a sentence with the cat sat on the blank, can you try and fill in the next most probable word? And you can do this over and over again, and you adjust based on the errors, and then eventually you get something kind of workable. And then the last piece is you can't just give this to people. And so that's when the AI model labs do what you call fine-tuning, or or reinforcement learning, where they give people the outputs of the model and they test it and they refine it. Kind of think about just teaching a kid something basic, and when they do something correct, you give them some type of reward or positive reinforcement. When they do something you don't like, maybe you put them on timeout or revoke a privilege or something like that. And so that process happens over and over and over and over again. And then eventually you have this large language model that we can type interesting things into a chatbot with and get something out that's hopefully useful or valuable to us. And so the way that this all works is that depending on the information that goes in, how the model is trained, and how it's adjusted, the different models that we use, whether it's in ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or DeepSeek, all exhibit slightly different tendencies and behaviors. And so whether you're studying or doing work, it's important to note that the results you get depend on the model, and they also depend on which tier of model you have access to. And in many cases, you'll find that you can get very good results for about $20 or $30 a month, whereas the free plans are free for a reason, in that this is a slightly outdated slide, but when you're on the free plan, whether it's for you or for your students, you're typically getting access to the least intelligent models. You're typically getting severely restricted in how often you can use them. And in my personal tests, I found that when you prompt the exact same thing into a free, lower intelligent model and a paid intelligent one, the larger model, typically the paid ones, give you more depth and nuance to your answers. So whether you're using it for lesson planning or getting some quick feedback on something you're working on, yes, the free answers will be good, but typically there's a reason there are tiers of intelligence. And over the past year and a half, what we found is that companies have gone from the free with limits and default $20 a month plan to now starting to offer $200 a month plans in some cases that give you access to the absolute best, most intelligent models in the world that researchers are using for more difficult tasks than most of us need for our work. So if you're considering subscribing or using an AI tool, I would say there's a notable difference between the free plans and the $20 a month plans, but we're also seeing companies roll out $200+ plans for heavy power users. And last week I saw a coding company, Factory, release a $2,000 a month plan for their code assist agent. So there's a sort of stratification of intelligence that's happening that I feel like is going to become more important over time. But for now, 20 a month is more than enough, especially if your employer is covering it. And the last really important consideration, as I'm sure you're all aware, is that AI model capabilities are expanding very, very quickly. So if you take a look at, so in pink, you have an evaluation called Math Level 5. And what this is a series of very challenging math questions that the top students in grade 10 and 12 and possibly early undergrad would typically go to competitions to try and solve to help them stand out. And in green, we have the GPQA Diamond, which is a Google-proof question and answer set, which is a mix of science questions across chemistry, biology, ecology, and maybe a few other things that are supposedly questions that are at a PhD level for their respective sciences and that are meant to test the reasoning ability of the large language model outside of just information it can search and retrieve. And over the course of the past 2 years, on many of these benchmarks, they're almost saturated, which means that in about 2003, the best model in the world for the math exam would score maybe a 24%. And for the science level PhD questions, you'd maybe get 35% if you're using the world's most intelligent model. And over the course of the past 2 years, those numbers and scores, as you can see, have jumped up dramatically once every few months. And now we're at a point where if you pay $20 a month for the best AI tool that in the world, whether it's GPT or Gemini or Claude, it can now successfully ace these very, very challenging exams, which is both good in terms of it pushing research forward, but then bad because it means a student can paste in their exam and get it answered, and it's much more likely to be entirely correct now than it was a few years ago, which is something we need to grapple with. And so the example I'm going to go with for now is this idea called humanity's last exam, which might not actually be the last one. But the goal of this data set was this idea of seeking experts from around the world and coming up with a list of frontier, leading edge, PhD level problems that are much harder than many of the other challenge and problem sets that we've given to AI to test its worth on, for the sake of making something so complicated that this is now a real measure of the intelligence of the AI that we're putting out there. And so they have questions across domains, but the example I love to give is this question about computer science that I'm just going to copy. And I'll leave this up on the screen for a few seconds so everyone can read this. Not that I know what this means, or not that I expect most people to make sense of this. And what's interesting about this is we know that AI has gotten so good that chances are I can paste this into Gemini and get a coherent explanation. So that's what we are going to do. So I'm going to go over into Google Gemini. In Gemini, we have two different models that we can access. We have the fast mode that typically you'll get on the free plan. And that's Gemini 2.5 Flash, slightly outdated, much less intelligent than 3 Pro that came out last week. And what I'm going to say, I'm going to use the dictation feature, and I'm just going to tell it, explain what this question means and what its answer is, as though I am a 12th grader. And I love the dictation feature because it means I can add so much more information than I would have if I had to type. And I'm using other software that we'll get to in a bit. But if I paste this question in, and I'm just going to send this off, and we're going to see what happens. And I'm going to activate the canvas feature so it creates a document for me. So we're going to send this off, and it's going to walk us through its reasoning process. And just because it's walking us through the reasoning process doesn't mean I actually understand what's going on. So I'm going to let it do its thing. It's going to reason, it's going to let me know what it's doing. I have absolutely no idea what this means, but we're going to take a look and see what it generates. And I think this is one of the more important considerations when it comes to AI, is that we can use it and it will spit out something that in many cases is seemingly convincing, but without the requisite background knowledge and exposure, despite the fact that it's coding for me in Python, it's creating a simulation for me in Colab, and that it's given me an entire, like a very long and what I assume is detailed and hopefully correct explanation, without the requisite background knowledge and domain expertise, I have no idea what this means and if I should trust it. So when we have students who are turning to AI to get answers and to get solutions, the things that they're turning to it for, one, I think are more well represented in its training data because they're more common problems and not bleeding edge. But even at that, they're not necessarily always going to be in a position to validate what they're getting out of the system, which has gotten students into trouble before. And so let's take a look at what it generated for us. Let's open this up. I have no idea what's going on, but I'm going to click run code and let's see what happens. Yeah, no idea at all. But this all looks very, very, very convincing. So I'll share this with you later in case somebody actually does understand. But the one thing to kind of understand in this is that one, model capabilities are expanding very, very quickly. They're now able to do many things that we and that students do or perform in certain tasks. But by the same token, we still need to understand what's going on for us to use them effectively. And so when we transition a little bit into different modes and products, I've highlighted in bold the ones that I tend to prefer for all of these different categories. And at this point, many of us are very aware of the text models, so the Copilots, the ChatGPTs, the Geminis. There are also many image generator models, so Nano Banana or Imagine, as well as my favorite, my personal favorite, Midjourney. When it comes to audio, we have two different modes. So we have transcription, which if you ever worked in a school with students who possibly are working with speech impediments or dyslexia, for example, some of the software that I had to use when I was teaching Dragon Naturally Speaking, and I forget the other name, but there are now tools that are so much more powerful that are able to understand what somebody is saying and transcribe it in real time, that this now opens up a pathway for accessibility for students who would have otherwise needed significantly more help. There's also this aspect of audio creation, which we'll jump into in a bit. So now you can create podcasts and songs and explainers with just text, which was not possible several years before. And you can do the same thing with the video generators. So like the video of the cats that we saw earlier, that was entirely built with Google's product Veo. OpenAI's come out with a product called Sora recently that does something similar. And then Notebook LM, which we'll get to in a bit, can also create explainer videos that I found particularly useful for the adults that I'm currently teaching. And for the elementary students, this idea of text to 3D model is so interesting. And there was an elementary school I was working with here in Toronto that what we ended up doing was using ChatGPT's image generator to come up with coloring book images that we would then import into our AI 3D modeling software that would turn the coloring book images the students came up with into 3D meshes that we would then print on the school library's 3D printer. And so all of these AI modes are opening up opportunities to do things that were not necessarily possible before. But I feel like where it all comes together really nicely is when you're using multiple modes in sync together. And that's what we're going to demonstrate really quickly. So what I'm going to do with Claude, and maybe I'll take a suggestion in the chat, is I want a theme. And I'm leaving this kind of intentionally vague. And I'm going to kind of preface this by saying, I'm going to dictate to Claude using my software, Whisperflow, and I'm going to tell it to do something for me. So based on the following keyword, create the description for a song in less than 50 words, as well as the description for its cover art or album art in another 50 words. And I'm going to take the first keyword that somebody types in the chat, and we'll see what happens. Okay, peaches. Thank you. All right, so we're going to say peaches, and really what's interesting about this, and maybe we'll do a comparison of ChatGPT and Claude, is that if I paste this in, the same thing, and I'm going to use auto mode or instant mode just because it's faster, but if I type in the same prompt to two different AI systems, the answers I get are different. And so if we take a look at this, do we have a preference? So on the left is Claude, on the right is GPT Instant, the version that people get if they use the free version. Should I go with Claude or should I go with ChatGPT? And I'm going to go with the first response I get in the chat. Oh, Claude, thank you. Yes. Okay, so goodbye. Goodbye, ChatGPT. You have not served us well today. So goodbye to that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take this. So here's the song description, and I'm going to go over into Suno. And Suno is the app that is one of the many apps that we can use to prompt our way to songs. So I'm going to paste in the song description here. I'm going to click create. And can somebody pick a genre for me, please? Pop. Okay. So, can I add some inspiration, and we'll say pop R&B. Yeah, okay, there we go. So we'll say pop R&B. There we go. So I'm going to click create, and we're at a scary point, I think, in history that 2 songs generated while I waited for feedback on what to do next. And I'll just play the introduction to both of them.
You're the drip of honey on my tongue, a lazy laugh, a song unsung, golden hour on your skin. Where do
Surprisingly
You're the
good.
drip of honey on my tongue, a lazy laugh, a song unsung, golden hour on your skin. Heat wave kisses melt my skin, golden hour light in my grin. Flip flop hearts on sandy street. Heat wave kisses melt my skin, golden hour light in my grin.
Students love when I do this in
Flip
workshops.
flop hearts on sandy streets. This love's a mango, sticky sweet. Summer sugar dripping down, tastes so good I can't slow down. Every touch a sunbeam by, you're my favorite day and night.
So I hope you were able to hear all of that, but we're now living in an age where it's faster to create songs than to listen to them, which I find personally really, really interesting to think about. Now, the second thing that we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to just copy this.
Okay.
And I'm going to go into 2 different image generators. So I'm going to do Gemini on the left.
Kinds of them. It's like he's using a bunch of different ones.
Oh, sorry, Ken, I think you were saying something? Oh. Ken and Claudia, I think I heard your mic for a second.
Sorry about that.
Oh, were you asking a question? I guess not. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to go Gemini on the left, and then I'm going to go Midjourney on the right. I'm going to paste in our image for our... Oh, the AI moderator is unsure about this prompt. Then let's go back into Claude, make the cover art description G-rated. And we can just go back and forth with our AI and tell it what to do and what to do differently. Here we go. So we'll take this, we'll go back into Gemini, we'll describe our image, we'll send it off, we'll do Midjourney, hopefully this doesn't get flagged, and let's just see what happens. Really interesting. So we take a look at what we get on the left. Really, really interesting. We take a look at the examples that we get on the right. Also very interesting. But I'm very, very biased. I think Midjourney is one of the best text-to-image tools that we can possibly use. And I also think that one of the underrated features is this idea of using what we call style references. And if we go back and we explore styles, what I can do is we can scroll through a ton of different artistic styles. And I'm just going to click a few of these and show you how it works. But you can very easily start making things just based off of your prompts and ideas you come across that would have been very hard to explore otherwise. And so just by adding that style reference, if this is the original, this is the first style, and you can see it kind of generating, so subtle differences. Third one seems to be more cartoonish or animated. Fourth one, completely different style, and all we did is change a few characters. And then fifth one, We'll give it a few seconds to finish generating, and then we'll move on. And so the creative possibilities really depend on your ability to communicate, articulate, validate, and then remix. And you can get very, very far. You can kind of get as far as your creativity allows you in some of these cases. And yeah, this is incredible. So we have our cover art. We have our song. If we wanted to use VO, we could maybe turn the cover art into a video. And I see a hand up. Go ahead. I think this is a Daisy.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much. I was just wondering if you can please talk more about students using AI in schools and the future of the work. As
Yep.
parents, we're interested in things like that. Is
We
it
were
possible?
just getting there.
Okay, thank you so much.
We were just getting there. So
Thank you.
yeah, so as you mentioned, there are a ton of things that you can do with it, both creatively and academically. And one of the things that I think is possibly the most useful tool that I've seen come out on the topic over the course of the past year is this tool called Notebook LM that I like to use a lot for myself and with many of the students that I work with. And so the way that it works in a nutshell, and I'll just jump down into this and maybe I'll open up my Notebook LM. But the way that it works in a nutshell is that as a student, you can open up a notebook and you can upload your resources. So typically, this is going to be course notes or readings, pictures of notes that you've taken yourself. And the way that this works is that as a user or as a student, you upload your sources, you have a chat window in the middle that you can use to ask questions about the sources you uploaded, and you have a ton of other features that are built to help with the ways that you learn. So I'm going to kick off two of these. So one is going to be a video overview that typically takes a few minutes. Same thing with the audio overview. And we're just going to one by one step through all of these different things. So a concept mind map, flashcards to help with memorization, multiple choice quizzes to help things sink into your memory, infographics that you've seen before, and the slide decks aren't really good, and I'd kind of advocate against the reports. So while all of this is generating, I'm just going to go back to the presentation because this does take a bit, and we're going to talk a little bit about what this means and why I think the majority of our focus should be on the large language models. And that's because when we think about what they can do, so text in, text out, they already excel at many tasks that we ask of our students and many tasks that we as working professionals perform. That can be roughly broken down into 4 categories of writing and analysis, research and synthesis, problem solving on top of that, and then as you've just seen, creative production. And so one of the things that I wanted to share is that this can be both good and very, very bad. And here's an example that I think we should kind of be aware of, is this idea of
They can't pull me.
AI-assisted browsers, which is something I think we all need to be aware of. So let's take a look.
That getting a 4.0 in school was this easy. I found this AI dedicated browser called Comet by Perplexity, and holy crap, it's changed my entire life. It literally works like any other browser like Chrome or Safari. I can just use Comet Assistant and summarize these lecture notes for me, almost instantly. And not only that, you can also use it to fill out your quizzes for you. All I have to do is go to the assistant and type fill out this quiz for me. It just takes control over my page and it'll start selecting all the right answers. Perplexity is giving students early access and 1 month of Pro for free. So get on that so you can ace your exams too and get a 4.0. It's that easy. Guys,
so there's been a lot of insidious marketing specifically around AI assisted or powered browsers, including this one, that I think in many cases are playing into students' need for perfection and some of their motivations for getting the best grades possible. So when I think about how we can be talking about or kind of breaking down the different ways students can be and are using these tools, they fall into two very distinct categories we'll touch on in a second. So Notebook LM for me is an amazing tool, and I'm completely unaffiliated with Google's ed tech department. But I like it a lot because it helps with many of the things that I would want to do for each and every single one of my students if I had more time and resources when I was teaching. And for the curious, they can get more personalized support. They can get explanations or analogies. They can get extra practice problems, examples. If there's a specific type of problem that they're not solving correctly, they can break it down in so much detail. They can get instant feedback and critiques on their answers. They can create learning pathways. They can go to it for career guidance, and they can even turn concepts into simulations or gamify things. And I think these are many of the proactive, curious uses I think we should encourage. But on the right-hand side, we have the list of things that I feel like many students unwittingly subject themselves to, that inadvertently rob them of many of the things and the habits that we're trying to build in them as they study. And that's the idea the idea generation, the writing the drafts and the outlines and then reworking them. That's, hey, here's the rubric for the report I have to write. Can you write it for me? Can you do my research project for me? Can you code for me? Can you draft things for me? Or can you just do this entire assignment on my behalf? And so when we think about student use, I think we have to be very aware of the difference between doing things because we're learning versus doing things because we need to produce something. And I think the producing part is much more common in the workforce than it is or than it should be when students are learning. And then by the time they get to work, they should be thinking about how they can use AI to augment what they can do instead of replacing it. And we're going to go over a few examples here in Notebook LM now that many of these resources have finished generating. So the first interesting thing that I like about Notebook LM is the mind map feature that sometimes people do just on their own. So what I like about this is this took, I think, a 30-page PDF about kinematics that I found online. I uploaded it to Notebook LM. And what it did is it started breaking down every single topic into a series of subthemes. Having taught physics before, this is actually pretty good. So we have mechanics, displacement, speed and velocity, which are two different things, acceleration, the 5 equations of kinematics, free-falling bodies, and then graphical analysis. And if I'm a student and I wanted to quickly review, let's say, speed and velocity, the mind map would help me. And if I click on this, and you have to click the little, the arrows, or else it sends you back to where you were before. But if it goes to speed and velocity, then I get another more comprehensive breakdown of what these different things are. So average speed, average velocity, instantaneous velocity. Maybe I want to go deeper into that. And now I get a very clear breakdown of the definition and a formula. Same thing for average velocity. And I can kind of visually explore, if I want to, the particular unit that I'm studying, which I think would have been very, very helpful to me when I was younger and if I were in their shoes. So we have definitions, we have concept maps, we have really quick bursts of information that if we're now able to make easier to review, maybe there's more that we understand over the course of the semester. And so we have our mind map, we have our flashcards, which students love to use. And the way that this works is that, again, it's just taken this information from your notes. You get, I think, typically 50 or 51 cards. Question, you can kind of think of an answer yourself, flip the card to view the answer. And if you don't understand why this is the answer, you can click this explain button to have it explained for you in the chat. And Gemini, I think, is very, very verbose. All of the explanations are grounded in the material that you've uploaded. But this is a very, 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 very long answer that if I just wanted a quick answer, I would probably try and explain differently. So I'd go here and I'd say, explain this in 2 sentences because I want it to be shorter. Think like a student. Send it. It reads through the files, and then it gives me a much shorter, more concise definition. So kinematics is the branch of physics dedicated to describing motion, blah, 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 blah. And then it gives me more information. Hopefully I've understood this. If not, I'll just say, I actually really like basketball and Dragon Ball Z. Can you explain it for me in those terms? And you can send this, and there's really no right or wrong. It just depends on how far you want to push the tools. So in this case, we have this very, very long explainer now that, if we read this correctly, is going to be explaining kinematics for us in terms that make sense to us based on our personal interests. So we can see this is a fantastic way to conceptualize the concepts of kinematics in one dimension, which is the branch of physics purely focused on describing motion, like gravity or momentum from a kick. So this can be perfectly mapped onto movements and battles we see in basketball and Dragon Ball Z. So here's the breakdown. And then it gives us the physics term, followed by the Dragon Ball Z analogy equivalent, followed by the basketball equivalent. And this is something that I would typically do with my students, just depending on their interests. But when I was teaching, I had to do this manually and think about things on the fly. As a teacher, these are things that you can start building in to personalize the way you're teaching. And as a student, you could just do this for yourself. So we have the mind map feature. We have the chat that we can use to explain things. We also have this feature that gives you a multiple choice quiz that maybe we would take a look. So runner completes exactly one lap, finishing at the starting point. Distance is 400, displacement is 0. I'm glad I got this because I'm a physics teacher. But if for whatever reason I did this and I quizzed myself and I, again, wasn't really sure of why this is correct, I can just click the explain button. And I get another very detailed and comprehensive reply. And then let's say we could say something like, why do students typically make this mistake? Is there anything I should look out for moving forward that would be helpful? In 2 sentences or less. And we send it. And so you can kind of start treating AI, especially Notebook LM, as this sort of collaborative tool that can offer insights and explanations and problems that to help you learn. And it can make all of this more approachable, but it still means that as a student, you're putting work in to internalize the things that are now becoming easier to understand. And we'll take a look at the video overview in a second. So what we're going to do, just to kind of continue this, is when we think about this, and I'll skip over the analogy of microbit and Toastmasters, but there's this idea that, yes, AI can make access to information easier, but learning is still going to require effort, it's still going to require diligence, and it's still going to require time. But we can use tools like this to make it easier to grasp some of this information. And the best example just finished. So I'll click a quick preview of this. So we also have this feature that allows us to build quick video overviews that I like to use a lot as quick refreshers for topics that I'm covering. And this is entirely audio and video and pictures generated by Google. Let's take a look.
You know, today we're going to learn a brand new language. And no, it's not Spanish or French. It's the language physics uses to describe literally everything that moves, from a planet zipping around the sun to a car driving down your street. So let's jump right in. Think about it. We see motion all around us, every single day. A car on the freeway, a coin you toss in the air, it's constant. But if you're a physicist, just saying something is moving fast doesn't really cut it. They have this incredibly precise and powerful language to describe it all. So the real question is, how do we learn to speak it? Well, the very first step in learning any language is figuring out which part of it you need to focus on first. See, the language of motion is part of a bigger field called mechanics, and it's got 2 main branches.
Okay, so on one side you've got kinematics. This is all about describing motion. You know, how fast is it going? Which direction? How is that changing? It's really the how. Then you have dynamics, which gets into the forces that are causing the motion. That's the why. For today, we are focusing entirely on kinematics, the art of description.
So I'm going to pause it there. And going back to my point, there is so much that you can repurpose or try that in many cases having access to the correct tools can be very, very helpful when used correctly and ethically in ways that sharpen your thinking and enhance your thinking rather than kind of replace it altogether. The second piece that I wanted to show on the topic was another video that I showed during the professional development session I did with HCDSB staff, which is about a minute long clip talking about why it's kind of still important to spend the time on the topics ourselves. Let's play it.
I think I used to conceptualize knowledge the way you see it in the movie The Matrix, where it's like I wanted the port in the back of my mind that the little needle would go into, and then I had read John Rawls's Political Liberalism.
Right.
I thought that what you were doing was like downloading information into your brain. And now I think that what you are doing is spending time grappling with the text, making connections. It will only happen through that process of grappling. And so the idea that you could speed run that, the idea that it could just be summarized for you, part of what is happening when you spend 7 hours reading a book is you spend 7 hours with your mind on this topic. The idea that O3 can summarize it for you, in addition to there's all this stuff you just will not have read, is that you didn't have the engagement. It doesn't impress itself upon you. It doesn't change you. What knowledge is supposed to do is change you. And it changes you because you make connections to it. Well, you're saying...
Yeah. Oh, so we see something in the chat. Yeah, so I personally use AI in my daily life, medical advice, and at work to do market analysis and content creation and more using ChatGPT, Gemini, and Perplexity. Even Notebook.LM is such an amazing tool. However, for my 12-year-old, I'm just worried about, is she going to use AI as a doer instead of a helping tool? And how can we give the kids a guided tool that won't allow them to use AI on their behalf? And so one of the things that I think is so important about this, and one of the things that I was going to talk about, is just this idea that the way that I treat AI is kind of the way that I treat the internet, in that it is a very general purpose tool. That sometimes you'll have tools that have specific guardrails around how and why they're being used. But if you were to, for example, put ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini into the hands of your 12-year-old, what happens next is completely based on her or his interactions with the tool. Notebook.LM is particularly interesting because it's kind of more geared to education. And within the app itself, there's a learning mode feature that is also starting to roll out into other tools. So if you take a look at Gemini, Gemini has a guided learning version that if you were to use it, this would be the thing that kind of pushes back and kind of asks for more detail and kind of doesn't give the answers, but there are ways of getting around this. The exact same thing can be said of ChatGPT, where I believe there's the study and learn mode that people have found very easy ways to get to just reveal the answers itself. So in a way, and to follow on onto the next question about the constructive and ethical use, I think it's about showing students that there's immense potential for both constructive and educational uses, but then also letting them know that the whole point of their education is for them to grow as people, as citizens, and to learn. And that, yes, there's a massive allure of getting AI to do things for you, but in the process, you're robbing yourself of the ability to learn that's going to help you down the line. So I think it's more of something that we need to work on with students and kind of coach them and guide them through, because to date, there isn't a tool that you can't find a way of just giving the answers that would eventually get in the way of students learning, if that's an answer to your question. Yeah. Ooh.
I just wanted to, Jonathan, I just wanted to do a
Yep.
quick trend check.
Yep.
So I don't know if parents had any more questions, if we wanted to go into a question period soon. Oh, we
Yeah.
see another question.
Yeah, the questions are already pouring in, so I'm happy to make that transition. So If you had to invest or create a suite of AI tools for our children to effectively research and study and making sure it's worth the money, what would you prioritize to have a toolkit to encourage the learning? I've been subscribing to Coconote for my 3 kids for over a year, just wondering if I should be investing elsewhere. I think it depends entirely on the age group of your kids. Ideally, you're finding tools that are both age appropriate, but then also open ended enough that if they have a question, they're able to go and get their curiosity encouraged. And so, what I found is that thanks to AI search tools, I'm more curious than ever. And I think that before them, I was asking far fewer questions than I wanted because it was much more inconvenient to get answers. And so it might be something like you sit down and show your kids, well, here's a tool that I use, or here's a tool that you use. When you have a question about something, here's how you can use it. And I think the majority of these tools have age restrictions such that I don't think children under the age of 13 are allowed to use them. High school students should be fine. But one of the things that I've found is that I can just go into Gemini, for example, and say, how do the 5 equations of motion work in the context of a grade 11 kinematics course? Use images and make it very descriptive. And I can send this, and within a few seconds, depending on the model that you're using. So this is the Pro version. If I switch over into the Flash version, which is the free one, you'll get an answer that's much more quick. But you'll just say this, and as of a few days ago, Google now brings images into your Gemini chats. So Flash is slightly less intelligent and capable, but the answers you get are very, very quick. So in this case, we get a picture of an object accelerating to explain something. We get a few other pictures and explanations and things like this. But with Gemini Pro, you get graphs. The explanations are a little bit more detailed. And I think I tend to prefer the answers I get out of it. But when you think about the ways that we would use Google or Wikipedia or search through things in a dictionary or an encyclopedia, we can just have the AI kind of act as that searcher for us that goes in and brings the information to us at any age group. Which AI tools the HCDSB elementary students have access to, I think would be a question for some of the staff. And I think what they can use very much depends on, one, what the board approves, but then also how the teacher is walking them through how to use it. Because at their age, I think everything they do has to be guided. And I think, only advocate for using it to do things that they themselves would not be capable of developing at their age. And a few examples would be coming up with some of the really detailed images that we saw earlier with Midjourney, or songs with Suno, or I've done workshops, for example, where we've had AI code apps for students to bring some of their ideas and visions to life. And at what age you let them explore it, I think it really depends on which tools. What should students study today in post-secondary to build a future-ready career? So I have much less guidance on what they should study, but more things that I think they should look out for. So this kind of stopped, but I think when we think about what's next, I do think that in many cases for students, it's not about what they study, but how they adapt to the tools that we now have available. In that, when Google started coming out, it was a fundamental shift in how people started getting information online. And those who were able to adapt and make good use of it were then able to get information more quickly, which then had downstream effects on the other knowledge work tasks that they work on. So a few things, and then I'll just really jump into the questions. Is just this idea that yes, AI can perform very, very well at certain tasks, but it's a general purpose tool. We decide how we're going to use it, And in the case of your children and the students we're supporting, we need to work very earnestly with them to educate them on how and when to use it so that they can make those decisions in an informed way. The second is that the AI tools we have today are the worst they're ever going to be. The AI tools that I found great value from 2 years ago are so bad that they're at the bottom of the scales that we showed. And to answer the question about the future of work, we don't have specifics because we don't know how quickly these tools are going to evolve. And the second is we don't know how long it's going to take industry to catch on meaningfully. And so I think we need to keep working on the critical thinking. I think we need to build foundational knowledge in many of the topics we're already studying. But then once we have that foundational knowledge, we need to work on soft skills like communication, agreeableness, how personable people are. Because when we have AI doing a lot of the grunt work or the research, what becomes more important is figuring out when to use it, how to use it, if to use it, and then to collaborate amongst whether it's people or AI. And so I think instead of prescribing anything, I would say we're still figuring out. We need to explore thoughtfully, we need to explore critically, and we're still so early because ChatGPT came out 3 years ago as of, I think, last week. And most people aren't making the best use of the tools yet. And so instead of prescribing a hard skill, I would say it's the soft skills that matter on top of domain expertise that will allow you to validate the outputs you're getting from the AI. So yeah, solid foundations, thoughtful exploration. I think that's what it's going to take to get your students ready for the future. And at this point, I think we have as much time as possible left for questions. I know we've started seeing things in the chat, but if anybody would like to unmute because everyone has access, we can do that as well. And interestingly enough, on my point about AI being the worst it's ever been, the last point that I see in the chat is that, yes, sometimes AI provides outdated and sometimes even incorrect information on certain subjects, sometimes even listing non-existing sources. How would kids understand if they can trust the data AI is giving them? Isn't it better for the learning process to encourage them to rely on trusted sources, published books, etc.? Yes and no. And that's a really, really good question, and also something that is getting better. So over time, if you're using the best AI models you have access to, the hallucination rate drops significantly and has dropped significantly. The second piece about it is that AI is now able, in many cases, to search the internet. And so you can ask it for sources that back up what it says, and you can go and explore those sources to make sure it's really being truthful or accurate. So this is a bit of maybe like a 3-tiered problem, where number 1 is using the best AI tool you have access to. 2 is making sure it can search the internet. And then 3, making sure you validate the sources before accepting anything. And there are ways. So for example, if I were to use Kagi, for example, and if I go into my assistant, I can basically filter out which parts of the web it searches results from. So I can search for academic sources, I can search in forums, I can be very specific about which information it's pulling from for the answers it provides me with, but I still need to go validate and vet it for myself because I can't ever publish something or send somebody something. And when they come back to me telling me that it's incorrect or that it made something up, that it's AI. Anything that I publish or that I produce or that I send somebody implicitly has my stamp of approval, so I'm accountable for it. And that's also something that we need to teach. Using AI to solve mathematics or physics questions may affect students' critical thinking, basic logic, as relying on AI can make it easier for them to obtain solutions without fully understanding the concepts. My point of view is that I don't ever want it to do their work for them. And I recognize that much in the same way that students who read over their textbook chapter for 3 days before the test might trick themselves into thinking that they're understanding more than they do, I think the same thing is happening with AI. So if we want to make sure that students are learning and not tricking themselves, the way that I typically tell students to behave around this for now is when you're working, or let's say we had the physics problem set. When you're working, do the problem set entirely on your own. Like close the computer, it's just you. If you have a formula sheet, your formula sheet and your calculator. And your job is to sit there and to kind of struggle through it and to give it your best shot first before turning to any AI for help. And if you're turning to AI for help, ideally you're going to it with very concrete questions that you need answered for you, or you're going to it with a draft or work that you think you would like improved, and you're really treating it as an additional source of support, but not to say that you're typically going to it for at the first sign of any resistance. You still need to build grit and resilience and the ability to push through discomfort if you're going to learn or achieve things. And there have been studies that show that depending on the way that students use AI, students who have access to it seem to perform better while they have access. But once that access gets removed, their grades drop below the baseline. And so the way that you would want to encourage students to use it is not as a answer every question for me, make everything clear for me right away, but it's more, can you treat me as though you were a type of Socratic tutor? Can you challenge me to revise my assumptions? Can you make me think again about what I'm doing before giving me the answer? And ideally, the AI is kind of pushing them towards deepening their understanding rather than giving them the answer. But I can also see that being a very good thing for the students who want that, and very frustrating for students who are tired or stressed or anxious and just want to get the best grade possible for various reasons. And the last piece, and I'm just scrolling down. So what can we do if we notice our child is relying too much on AI and seems less motivated to think and write for themselves? I would just sit down with them and talk about that. So we have to kind of recognize that students are facing a lot of pressure, both socially and academically. The world is changing before their eyes in ways that they might not even understand right now. And I think we have to be very, one, just aware of everything they're going through, but also empathetic enough that we can talk to them and kind of co-discover what this means. Because I think the last thing that they want, and I've spoken with many students who flat out refuse to use AI for this very reason. But like I said, it's a general purpose technology. So it can be helpful, it can be harmful, it depends on how we use it. And many students don't know that we can push it to act in a way that's beneficial to us, even though it's possibly inconvenient. Yeah, so to follow on what Jeff typed out in the chat, ensuring ethical and effective AI use is a shared responsibility between teachers and parents. Much in the same way that we had to have the talks with, hey, when Wikipedia came out, you can't just copy paste the thing from Wikipedia and pass it off as your own work, because in the process, you're cheating yourself of the learning and the work that we really want you to do. So together we can guide students to use technology safely, responsibly, and in ways that enhance learning, but it has to be very intentional, and it has to start with understanding what is possible with the tools so that we're informed enough to have those discussions around how it works, what it can be used for, and to also mitigate some of the allure of the write me a 2-paragraph essay about XYZ topic when we just want students to think about things. So the way that AI can be used to support, so how can AI tools be used to support students who learn different from others or who need extra help? So we have a few examples of that. And what I'm going to do, interestingly enough, I'm going to ask the best AI model in the world just for some ideas. So I'm going to put this in, and I'm just going to type this, and let's see what the internet says for us. So even before kind of going through the examples, I think I don't like the word personalized tutoring, because a tutor, much as a teacher, has a relationship with the student and knows way more about them than what the AI is getting. And so there's so much more to the learning relationship than just feeding information to a student. And so I personally like the word personalized support over personalized teaching or personalized tutoring. But I would say the additional explanations, the transformation of information between audio and video and text can be helpful. The additional explanations, analogies, practice problems are all things that I think can help. And then also the ability to dictate instead of type or write in some cases can also be helpful depending on the student. What I would say is that's definitely a conversation to be had with your students' teaching staff to understand where they would benefit the most from support, and then work your way backwards to try and find tools that meet those needs. Is there a course that's geared towards teaching AI effectively at school? There are a few, and I think many of them would be from the larger AI providers. So if you take a look at Google Education AI for teachers, and I'll make sure to send these links over afterwards. So there's a Google course that came out that's completely free that's called Generative AI for Educators. Anthropic, the company behind Claude, has another academy. So if we search up Anthropic Academy, there are a number of courses that you can take online and for free, both for students and for teachers, that gives an overview and some practical tips and tricks. But I will say that beyond the courses, for this to make sense, you need to have people experimenting, exploring, and sharing what they know. Because not everyone's going to take the course, not everyone's going to understand it the same way, and there's so much more to how this all works that we need to discover, I think, for ourselves. The last question I see in the chat right now is, how are teachers staying ahead of the rapid improvements and changes with AI? I would say that it's not, I wouldn't even answer this question from the perspective of teachers. I think people in general, including enthusiasts, are finding it incredibly difficult to make sense of everything. If I see that Gemini gets a 97 on PhD level math problems, I don't know how that affects the work that I'm doing. So a lot of this comes down to exploration, testing things out that are personally relevant, and then going from there. And one of the things that I suggest kind of so often is AI is amazing at search. So you could go into ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, and I think this is a feature that only works with ChatGPT and Gemini, and you can say something like, create a scheduled action that once a month gives me a bullet point list of all of the new AI releases, and give me a paragraph at the bottom of this report with what it means for students and working professionals. And you can send this. And the keyword with this is in GPT and Gemini is this idea of a scheduled action. I have to keep up with this stuff daily because of the work that I do. But in many cases, you can just ask AI to set a reminder for you. And once a month, you'll get a notification with, here we go, with this AI releases. So just by saying create a scheduled action, GPT has created a schedule for me called Check AI Releases that monthly on the first of every month at 9 in the morning, which I believe is Pacific time, it runs a prompt to search for new AI releases in the past month and send me a bullet point list of them, followed by a paragraph explaining what they mean for students and working professionals. And once a month, I'll get this notification. And so that's how I would say, unless you have to keep up with this stuff for work, just have AI go search for you. It'll give you the gist, and I think it should be more than enough. Same thing with parents. If you're exploring and you notice something that is particularly helpful for you, or you're going off and you tried something with one of your kids that you find is particularly helpful or useful, and I'll give you the example of Notebook LM. If that's something you discovered on your own, you can make your kid's teacher's job much easier, hopefully, by just sending them a quick message or talking to them briefly and saying, hey, I tried this thing. Here's a link to the website. Here's how it works. here's an example of how I used it to help my child with XYZ topic. I hope this is helpful to you. And by crowdsourcing that information, whether it's at the CPIC level, whether it's at the school level or the school board level, if we're able to just make it very easy for other people to discover what's possible, hopefully that streamlines the entire process. And yeah, having AI go off and do the grunt work for us is an incredible experience. And what I say to most businesses and not-for-profits that I work with is change management takes a lot of time. And unless you are building a technical product that relies on this to power whatever it is that you're building, I think you're perfectly fine checking in maybe once every quarter, maybe half a year, because we're at a point as of maybe summer of this year where it doesn't matter which tool you're using, as long as it's a paid tool from one of the best in the world, you're going to get economically valuable results out of it. You might just need to swap the brain of your system once every year, depending on what you're doing. Ooh, psychophancy. I love this, and I'm probably mispronouncing psychophancy. So interestingly enough, on the psychophancy piece, there are several benchmarks that people run. Yeah, there are several benchmarks that people run on different AI models to start understanding which model will kind of feed into your delusions, which model will push back at you, which model will say, wait a second, you should probably rethink this. And so there's a benchmark which I think maybe renders a little bit poorly because I'm zoomed in, but there are people who study all of these different models to try and figure out, of the models that you speak with, which ones are the most likely to reinforce your delusions. And those are typically the ones that you want to avoid. So Claude at the moment is, I think, one of the safest in the world. The chat version of ChatGPT, they've done a ton of work on recently. And psychophancy is just this idea. And again, if I'm mispronouncing it, I'm sorry. But it's this idea of you going into the AI, and instead of it telling you that you're doing something wrong, its default response is going to be, you are fantastic, you are the greatest in the world, you've unearthed some conspiracy theory or things like that, where a human or somebody trying to be helpful would normally push back at you and say, wait a second, you're telling me that you've discovered a new theory of gravity where everything floats up instead of falling down. Depending on the model that you're using, some of them might encourage you, and there are articles that I'll send over afterwards on the topic. And others will be like, wait a second, what you're saying isn't grounded in truth. Maybe you should revisit this, and kind of steer you away from harmful thoughts or behaviors. So when we think about psychophancy, it's just this idea that ideally you're using a model that pushes you back towards reality and away from harmful thoughts or behavior as defined by the model providers, versus telling you that you're always right and that your ideas are always the best, which is something we try and avoid when we're working with these models. No worries. So this has been, I think, a lot of information. I still have, I'm sure there are a few unanswered questions. So my son is using AI. Should we be afraid? No, not at all. It's a tool like any other. And I would say the more you explore and the more you use the tool itself, the more you can build up your acumen around when to use it, when not to use it, and what its real limitations are. I am both very impressed and very unimpressed on the daily by the way that these tools work. So I think it's a lot of experimentation we have ahead of us. I see a question from Christopher. So my son is using AI too much, and I know, you're very welcome, and I know is using it to do projects and homework and is doing unusually well. What should I do? Talk to him. Talk to him. Because I think a part of this is you could come down very hard and be punitive, but I don't think that would be the most constructive approach. Ideally, you want to have a conversation with your son, depending on what age he is, and really enforce the fact that the whole point of him being educated is for himself, is for him to learn, to grow as a person, to explore new ideas, to become a better citizen, to develop his personal ethical, moral compass, and that by outsourcing the work of thinking, yes, he gets this short-term high of I'm getting my 96s and 97s, but when the day comes that that tool is removed from him and he has to do these things on his own, it might be it might be just a very sad moment. It might be a very anxious moment. And as much as possible, you want to work to build up his capacity to think, to learn, and to use the tool. So that might be just a future conversation to have with him.
Thank you, Jonathan. I see that Michael has his hand up if he wanted to ask a question.
Oh, Michael, you're muted.
Not so much a question as a comment to answer some of the questions here. A little plug for tomorrow is a PA day. I know many parents know this because they're taking care of their kids at home. But that's also the day where our secondary teachers will be focusing in on AI learning. That is the focus of our learning for teachers and professional development on tomorrow for secondary. Elementary will be happening in February. So a lot of the questions that you've been asking about teachers, we are aware of, and we are working with our staff very carefully. And for those who don't know me, I'm the superintendent of education for the parent council and the parent engagement lead, also the math lead. But I work carefully with our curriculum department when it comes to AI tools. And, you know, as the math lead, I could tell you we're very aware of the power of what AI can do to calculate things, but also how it may take away some of the work that students may be required to do. So we're working on that together. Thank you, Jonathan, for the record. I know there'll be a formal thank you coming shortly.
Yeah, and what I'll say, and I know we had parents who had to drop off and many parents who couldn't attend. So what I'll do, I'll send this in the chat for those who are still here. But typically, as I mentioned, after sessions like this, I like to I know there's a lot of information that we send, a lot of information that we give. And so I mentioned earlier that I like to curate a post-session resource pack with a few articles, maybe guides that you can use to talk to your students about. And so I have this post-session feedback survey. Should take about 2 or 3 minutes. I've sent a link in the chat. Please let me know what you thought, what you'd like to explore more, if you have any unanswered questions. And typically I open this up for a few days after each session. So by this time next week, I should have something much more comprehensive for you via email that you can use as an ongoing reference. Christopher, your question, do high schools have tools that can tell if students are using AI? I'm going to send you a follow-up resource on this because AI detectors don't work. And I love talking about this in every professional development session I do. If you're prompting the AI well, if you're using the best AI tools, if you are using your own language, if you're using it as a critic, or if you're using it to give you ideas and you write it yourself, AI detection is worse than a coin toss, and I think unfairly punishes certain students while letting students who have better access and better AI acumen get away with more. And this is the worst AI we're ever going to use. So I can see it getting more nuanced and harder to police over time.
Thank you, Jonathan. I just want to be mindful of the time. I know you've got busy parents and it's 8:45. So I just want to say thank you. We're going to actually go into our closing prayer. I appreciate you, Jonathan, for plugging in your information into the chat. And yeah, parents will we'll keep in the loop with their parents with what you're doing and how you're supporting our schools and our students. Ida, do you want to go into our closing prayer?
Perfect.
Yes,
Thank you very
yes.
much, everyone.
Thank you.
I hope you got something from this.
For sure.
Thank you. We can start with the sign of the cross in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of knowledge and for the opportunity to gather together today to learn about new technologies that shape our world. As we explore tools like artificial intelligence, grant us the wisdom to use them responsibly, ethically, and for the greater good. Bless our students, our teachers, and families that we may always seek truth act with compassion, and make choices guided by their Catholic faith and values. Lord, help us to embrace innovation without losing sight of our humanity. May everything we learn and create be used to build community, foster understanding, and uplift those in need. We ask you for your continued guidance and protection as we journey forward today. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this event. We're always looking forward for feedback or suggestions from the community on topics parents are interested in. If you have any questions, and if you have an idea for a future speaker series topic, let us know and submit your suggestions to us to CPIC via our email. Our email is CPIC, CIPIC@hcdsb.org. Also follow us on our social media. We're on X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Have a good evening. We look forward to seeing you at our next CPIC event. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.